Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We are in the home stretch of the show. I really hope you appreciated that kind of interesting segment as we transition to the football season. I know it's going to get more amped up as the football season starts, but still, I'm just glad to present that to you guys. But coming up next, we know we're finishing a grueling fantasy basketball season, but I just wanted to offer you guys a recent mock draft I did for fantasy basketball. Way too early fantasy basketball mock draft. But I think that this one is very exciting, mainly due to the level of players I've got on this team. A lot of talent, both in my starting lineup and on my bench. So without further ado, let's get right into this segment. Starting off with the whole format of this. It was a snake draft. I picked second overall, so a very high pick for me. This is in a head-to-head points league, so very popular league for ESPN. If you use that platform, this is the segment for you guys. So starting off, obviously, the second overall pick. Nikola Jokic obviously went number one, but Luka Doncic is a fantastic second option. Probably the best fantasy player in the world right now. I mean, he is just leaps and bounds over everyone else, and to prove that, you see it in the NBA Finals. Even in a losing effort, Luka Doncic just does it all. And this season, he had 4,167.4 fantasy points. Not too shabby. When all is said and done, Luka Doncic could be one of those players to break the top 10 of greatest fantasy basketball players in my mind. He's just that good. He produces at all levels, a triple-double machine who is a no-brainer in any fantasy basketball lineup, whether daily, points, categories, what have you. Luka Doncic can get you so much production. He can even get you half of your points in one game. He's that crazy. Just a fantastic all-around player, and I'm glad to have him. He is in my point guard position, just to show the versatility he can be. You can use him in a utility role on different game days. So Luka Doncic just had to be. Coming in my shooting guard position is a guy in Jalen Brunson who really may fall off a little bit. He may regress to the mean because obviously he had to do a lot for the Knicks as injuries piled up for them last year. But still, he's a metronomic point guard who facilitates the basketball well. He fits very well for what the Knicks want to do. And ultimately, he is their number one option still. I don't necessarily believe they have a quote-unquote number two option. Jalen Brunson is their guy, number 1A, 2, maybe even 2A for this Knicks team. That's just how reliable he is at the shooting guard position after I drafted Luka at the point guard spot for both the New York Knicks and you in fantasy. I think this is a fantastic pickup for any squad. I think that Jalen Brunson, whether he plays at point guard or shooting guard, I don't know if you guys want to get into that hybrid role debate, but he still is a fantastic point guard who just gets the job done. Maybe not as high in defensive stats as one would like at a shooting guard position, but still, Jalen Brunson gets you that high level of point production that I really like. 3,304.1 fantasy points last season, if you care. Probably my most interesting player, and a player who I kind of took a flyer on at my small forward spot, Brandon Ingram, the slender man himself. He is one of those guys who, for the most part, can be an interesting fantasy basketball player. He had 2,282 points, 0.3 points. Not bad for a small forward. Obviously, the small forward, not necessarily one of the more important positions in fantasy basketball. So it was kind of one of those things where I didn't necessarily care that he fell into my lap. But last year, he was 36th in usage rate. So just go to show the high risk, high reward kind of style that Brandon Ingram offers. But he is in a Pelicans team where, they're trying to build something, they're trying to build structure around mainly their front court. Obviously, they have Zion, and when he's healthy, they definitely get boosted. They have guys on the perimeter like Jose Alvarado and Herb Jones who provide more defense, and somewhere in the middle, you have to have a guy like Brandon Ingram who can also score at a high level. he actually did have more points last year than, or rather not, he did have the fewest points actually on my squad as I'm looking at my notes here. But still, Brandon Ingram is one of those guys who you can't necessarily ignore because small forward can swing the game in your favor, but can also be non-important if your top point guards or centers really step up to the plate. So Brandon Ingram, it is what it is. I accept him as one of my players for my mock draft, but probably not for a real-time draft because of the fact there might be better guys out there. But speaking of no-brainer picks, obviously I have Luka at my point guard spot. This was a no-brainer pick. Anthony Davis. I don't necessarily care about the Lakers' new coaching, how that kind of reshuffles the team mindset. Anthony Davis had his best year of all time last year. 40-point average when he played. Obviously, there are still questions about his injury history, and rightly so. But Anthony Davis, the fact of the matter is, he was a fantastic fantasy basketball player last year. Top 10. Like, insane stats for fantasy basketball. 3,807.2 points last year. That's pretty close to Luka in terms of stat production in fantasy. Not many people are close to Luka, but that's pretty damn close for Anthony Davis. And so, Anthony Davis fitting into my squad as a no-brainer. And then in the center position, obviously, they're there. They always sneak up on you. He's a Boston Celtic. Kristaps Porzingis. Now, obviously, this season, kind of had to fit into the Celtic structure. He did have his best scoring season and stat line this past year with the Celtics, but still, Kristaps Porzingis is one of those fantasy players who doesn't necessarily fit into like the Celtics fantasy conundrum because he's not necessarily going to be one of the higher fantasy point scorers for them. That's up to the JTs and JBs of the world. But Kristaps Porzingis is one of those players just solid. He can come off the bench, can start some of the time if you feel he has a nice little matchup. So he's one of those guys who I'm confident I can reshuffle my roster with when necessary. He can move in and out of the lineup if need be. Speaking of bench, I think I have two very interesting bench players. Franz Wagner and Tyler Hero. Franz Wagner, I'm really excited to have on my bench because he's in a young up-and-coming Magic team that's really building around their front court. They're really starting to mesh together, and I think the Magic will have a fantastic year. And Franz Wagner will be one of the reasons why. Fantastic rebounder, offensively and defensively. Fantastic overall defensive player. Maybe lacking a little bit in offensive production, not one of the better kind of shooting forwards in the front court for fantasy purposes, but still a fantastic fantasy season last year, especially if you're considering him as a bench player. 2,352.7 points for him last season. So Franz Wagner, I'm really confident can be a very fantastic sleeper utility player for you. Another of those guys, I think of him and KP kind of being those interchangeable power forward / center hybrids that can really help a squad pull out a game. So I do believe that those two can be kind of pivoting in and out of the lineup, and it will work in terms of center production. And then a guy off the bench who I kind of like just for his three-point efficiency, the way he plays the game of basketball to get as many 3 points as possible. Maybe a nice little add to the bench if you want, more points scored than, a categories league. And Tyler Hero, only 1,396.4 fantasy points last year. So he's definitely one of those guys who has a high risk, high reward kind of appeal to him. But still, he's going to chuck up a huge number of threes, and more often than not, they go in. He's had a fantastic 3-point field goal percentage and efficiency rating in the past. So Tyler Hero, rounding out my bench, is one of those guys who I might not play as often. He's there if I need him, but he could be fun to utilize, especially if you want a little bit of oomph off your bench, and if you're kind of lacking behind, and if you're in a categories league and you need more points, especially 3-pointers. then Tyler Hero might be an interesting option. But that will just about do it for this very early fantasy basketball mock draft. I hope you guys liked it. I really liked it because I got the chance to pick Luka. I may never get the chance to pick Luka again because I'll probably be picking lower in different leagues. But ultimately, I really, really like this squad, especially for a mock draft, because you have players who are so diverse. You have players that I took flyers on, who I might not necessarily have taken flyers on if I were in a real-time draft. So it was just a nice little experiment, just a kind of nice way to kind of hype up the fantasy basketball realm as the NBA Finals are winding down. So just a nice little segment there. But for today's last segment of the show, stick around. We are going to be talking about the MVPs and LVPs of the fantasy basketball season. The guys who really rose to the occasion, unsung heroes, and then the disappointments of fantasy basketball. It should be a fantastic segment to close out the show. You don't want to miss it. We will be right back with that.